how do we really know what happened in the past? I mean, what are the actual foundations for understanding fields built on, well, history?
That's a huge question, isn't it?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We dig into the sources to bring you the key insights. And today we're looking at historical research itself, the methods historians use.
Yeah, exactly. We've got some really interesting material here. It explores the whole process, the nature of historical research. It does mention missiology, the study of Christian missions.
Right.
But the core ideas, they're much broader. They apply to, well, pretty much any historical inquiry.
Definitely. So our goal today is pretty straightforward, right? Let's unpack what historical research actually is, how it works day to day, and, why it matters for getting a proper handle on things.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, let's dive in. What does history even mean in this context? It feels like a word we use all the time, but maybe don't always define precisely.
Well, our sources offer a couple of angles. Generally speaking, you could say history is knowledge of the past achieved through an inquiry of past human actions. So it's fundamentally about investigating what people did.
Right, investigating. So like me remembering a chat I had yesterday isn't quite historical research, even though it's history in a tiny personal sense.
Exactly. It's personal memory. The source also gives a more, let's say, restricted sense. History as a present intellectual reconstruction of a specific human past through detailed research and interpretation of evidence.
Ah, okay. So that's where the active research part really kicks in. It's not just remembering, it's building something.
Precisely. It's building an understanding. The goal of the research is to restore and understand past human events, answering specific questions about why people acted as they did.
Okay, restoring and understanding. And it's a key point here about focus, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Historians focus on what the text calls socially significant actions, not, absolutely everything that ever happened.
Right. Socially significant. So not what someone had for breakfast normally.
Unless, perhaps.
Unless they invented cornflakes.
Okay.
And that actually changed things for lots of people.
Perfect example. Yes. It's about actions with some kind of broader ripple effect or meaning. And when looking at these actions, there are two sides to consider.
Okay.
The external facts, like what actually happened, what you could observe, and then the internal thought, the motivations, the beliefs, the intentions of the person doing the action.
Got it. So a historian wouldn't just say, okay, this law passed.
Yeah.
They dig into, well, what were the lawmakers actually trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
What problems were they trying to solve from their perspective?
Exactly that. The historian's job is essentially to grasp that whole picture, the action and the thought behind it, and then recreate it intellectually to really explore the why.
Which requires a systematic approach, I imagine.
It does. Which leads to something interesting our source brings up, this idea of history as a science.
Yeah, that might make some people pause. History, a science, like physics.
Well, maybe not exactly like physics, but the argument is it fits the criteria. It has a subject matter, unique human events tied to specific times and places.
Okay.
It has a methodology designed specifically for studying past events, which are obviously different from repeatable experiments.
Right, you can't rerun the Battle of Hastings.
You cannot. And it has an objective to understand causal connections, how events influence each other, their interdependence. So the key idea is that it's not just storytelling, it's a rigorous pursuit of understanding.
So like a scientist, a historian is looking for cause and effect. How did X lead to Y?
In a way, yes. Seeking connections, understanding influence. And the source really emphasizes that it's the methodological approach, the systematic way they go about it, that allows historians to gain this knowledge and see those causal links.
Okay, so let's get into that methodology. How do they actually do the research? What are the steps?
Right. The source lays out 4 main stages: heuristic, critique, synthesis, and exposition.
Heuristic, critique, synthesis, exposition.
You can think of it roughly as, first, find the stuff. Second, check if the stuff is any good. Third, put it all together meaningfully. And fourth, tell people what you found.
Find, check, assemble, share. Got it. Let's start with step 1, heuristic. Sounds a bit technical. What's that?
Heuristic is basically the discovery phase. It's all about finding the data, the raw materials from the past. The source talks about establishing rules for getting evidence from documents, essentially turning those documents into usable sources for your specific questions.
Okay, finding the evidence. And this finding stage, it has its own many steps, right? 4 moments.
It does. Bibliographic, thematic, erudite, and diagnostic.
Let's take them one by one. Bibliographic. That sounds like libraries.
Pretty much. The bibliographic moment is about surveying the landscape. What research has already been done on your topic, what books, what articles exist,
Okay.
and crucially, identifying potential primary sources, those first-hand accounts or original documents from the period you're studying. This means hitting the libraries, the archives, sifting through catalogs.
Right. Figuring out what's out there, both what others have said and what original materials might exist. Okay, then the thematic moment.
Thematic is where you really sharpen your focus. You define and narrow down your specific research question. This often comes from spotting, gaps or contradictions in what you found in the bibliographic step.
Ah, so you see two historians disagreeing, or notice nobody's really looked at a particular angle.
Exactly. Or maybe it's just your own burning curiosity about a specific puzzle within the broader topic. You go from, say, World War II to the role of women code breakers at Bletchley Park. That's the thematic moment.
Finding your specific niche. Got it. What about erudite? Sounds scholarly.
It is. Erudite means you might need to go back to the sources you've already gathered, but with, new eyes.
How so?
Well, maybe something you learned later sheds new light on an earlier document. You revisit the material, looking for details you overlooked or perhaps misunderstood the first time around, trying to fill in remaining gaps in your evidence. It's a deeper dive into the sources you have.
Okay, like rereading interview notes after you've spoken to someone else, and suddenly a comment clicks.
Precisely. And the last part of finding is the diagnostic moment.
Diagnostic. Like diagnosing a document. What does it involve?
It's about looking closely at the physical object itself, if you have it.
Yep.
You observe and describe its characteristics, its form, paper, ink, handwriting, seals, watermarks, condition, size. And you record the basics. Date, who wrote it, a summary of what it says, any signatures where you found it. It's like creating an ID card for your source. Establishes its basic identity and context.
Okay, so that's heuristic, finding all the pieces. Then step 2 is critique. Sounds like where we get critical.
That's exactly it. Critique is the qualitative analysis. You've got the material, now you need to assess its quality. And again, 4 moments here. Morphologic, alethologic, hermeneutic, and axiologic.
Wow, okay, morphology is about form, right?
You got it. Morphologic critique is about authenticity. Is this document, this testimony, actually genuine? Or is it a fake, a forgery? Historians use specialized tools here. Things like paleography, studying old handwriting to see if it matches the supposed date, or epigraphy for inscriptions, numismatics for coins, if those are relevant.
So they're asking, is this really a letter from Queen Elizabeth I? Is this coin actually Roman? That kind of thing.
Exactly. It's fundamental verification. You have to know if your source is real before you can rely on it.
Makes sense. What's next? Alethologic.
Alethologic critique deals with veracity. Truthfulness.
So it can be real, but not true.
Precisely. That's a crucial distinction. A document can be perfectly authentic, genuinely from the time period, but contain biases, propaganda, mistakes, or outright lies.
Like a genuine diary entry from someone who was trying to make themselves look good or just misremembered an event.
Exactly. Or sometimes a later copy might actually be a truthful representation of a lost original. So authenticity and truthfulness aren't the same thing. You have to assess both.
Okay, that's a really important point. After checking authenticity and veracity, we get to hermeneutic.
Hermeneutic critique. This is the interpretation moment. Now you take the evidence you've decided is authentic and hopefully reasonably truthful, and you use it to answer your research questions.
Right.
You're trying to understand what the source means in its context, how it helps solve the puzzle you set out in the thematic stage. And sometimes, interpreting one source raises completely new questions.
So it's not just reading the words, it's understanding the meaning behind them in that specific time and place.
Yes. And the final moment of critique is axiologic.
Axiologic, value judgment.
Kind of. It's about evaluating the significance of what you've learned from that source or piece of evidence. How important is this new fact or interpretation to your overall research problem? Does it change the picture significantly?
Okay, so assessing the weight or impact of the finding.
Okay.
We found the pieces heuristic, we've checked them out thoroughly, critique. Now we need to put them together. Synthesis.
Correct. The synthesis step is where you arrange all that analyzed material coherently. You build the historical construction, as the source calls it. You create a unified picture from all the elements you've developed.
And there are 2 logic moments here. Selective and creative. Selective first.
Selective logic is about choosing the best, most relevant information from everything you've gathered. You likely have way more data than you can actually use in your final account.
Right.
So you have to select the evidence that most directly addresses your research question. is the most reliable and helps build a clear narrative or argument. It's about filtering and focusing.
Focusing on the key pieces of the puzzle, leaving out the less critical details.
Yeah.
Makes sense? Then the creative moment. That sounds interesting.
It is. The source describes this as the historian really trying to grasp the event as it was, letting the evidence guide them. They immerse themselves in the data until they can mentally recreate the event or situation. It's this intellectual reconstruction that transforms past events into, well, historical facts, things understood and interpreted with relevance for us now. It's creative not in making things up, but in the mental effort of rebuilding that past reality based on evidence.
Like trying to see it through the eyes of the past, but with the benefit of all the analyzed evidence.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so you've synthesized everything. The final step is exposition.
Exposition, sharing the results.
Exactly, presenting your findings. This could be, a book, an article, a lecture.
Yeah.
Orally or written, detailed or concise, depending on the audience.
And the source stresses objectivity here
Right.
and clarity.
Very much so. Objectivity in presenting the understanding you've built.
Uh-huh.
And clear communication, good writing style, proper footnotes so people can check your sources, logical organization. It's about contributing knowledge responsibly.
Okay, that whole process, heuristic, critique, synthesis, exposition, sounds incredibly thorough. Rigorous, even.
It's meant to be.
So after all that, how? How valid is historical research? Can we really trust what it tells us about the past?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The source argues that understanding our human past is vital for self-knowledge. History acts like a mirror reflecting our shared humanity.
Learning from past successes, failures.
Exactly. Learning what it means to be human by studying past achievements, cultures, responses to challenges. The source says it fosters a love for truth. But
There's always a but.
there is. It acknowledges limitations. Historical knowledge is described as seeing a poor reflection as in a mirror, knowing in part. It's not like physics with mathematical certainty.
So not an exact science in that sense. Interpretation plays a big role.
It does, and the very act of selection, choosing what to study, which evidence to highlight, introduces a degree of partiality. It can't be the whole truth, just by definition.
So reliability really hinges on the historian.
Heavily. On their commitment to the methodology, their honesty in interpreting sources, and crucially, their awareness of their own perspectives and potential biases. Acknowledging presuppositions is key.
Right. And you mentioned our source material connects this all to missiology. Briefly, how does that fit?
Well, the text makes the point that Christianity is inherently a historical religion. It's rooted in specific events claimed to have happened in time and space.
Okay.
So, Christian proclamation, the life of the church, these are also historical realities unfolding within history. Therefore, the methods of historical research are seen as essential tools for understanding, say, the history of missions or the development of Christian thought and practice.
So applying these methods helps understand the church's history and mission more accurately.
Precisely. It provides a framework for knowledge, for interpreting the historical witness, for reconstructing past actions related to that mission. It grounds the study in evidence-based research.
Interesting how the methodology applies across different fields needing to understand their past.
Absolutely.
So pulling this all together, it's clear historical research is way more complex than just, listing facts from old books.
Definitely. It's a really active, critical process. Finding evidence carefully, interrogating that evidence for authenticity and bias, weaving it together into a coherent interpretation, and then presenting that interpretation clearly and honestly.
It involves a lot of judgment calls, interpretation, synthesis, not just collecting data.
And it demands real critical thinking, a dedication to following the evidence where it leads and acknowledging the inherent difficulties in knowing the past perfectly.
And I think understanding this whole process, the steps, the challenges, gives you a much deeper appreciation for any history you read, doesn't it? And maybe for how knowledge is built in general when we look backwards.
It really does, which kind of leads to a final thought, maybe for you listening. How might these principles, finding evidence, checking it critically, putting it together, apply in your own world? Maybe when you're trying to figure out a complex situation at work or understand trends in your field or even just piecing together family stories, what are the socially significant actions in your own context that might benefit from thinking a bit more like a historian?